Chapter 2, Little Blood Moon. We took those blankets to a giveaway ceremony. Don Juan shared his own resources with me, and he also asked that I share my inner resources, my very being, with him. To begin the timeless link with me from childhood and girlhood to womanhood in a tangible way, Don Juan and I had frequent animated conversations about being raised as a little child in the basement playroom. He found the whole visionary, spiritual experience to be a fascinating tale of multiple levels of reality, all perceived simultaneously. The tale, he said, was filled beyond the brim with active manifestations of genuine, authentically perceivable energetic entities and spirits, with the intent of enriching my awareness of the entire experience. He provided me with lengthy and practical energetic insights, often mixed with the ancient wisdom of Mesoamerican creation story. He had learned of this particular creation story from a Mayan friend, a peerless healer and dreamer. Don Juan felt that the story paralleled my experiences to such a high degree that recounting it would be a useful teaching tool. Merely recounting, however, was never in the cards for Don Juan. He carefully, artfully wove my own experiences into the story, while taking me entirely out of the picture, so as to focus the tale on the most universal axis, something that everyone feels, the pain of being alone and having to overcome hells, suffering, and death. There was once a young maiden by the name of Little Blood Moon, Don Juan began, which also means early menstruation, or red lunar eclipse. She was not a human maiden at all, but the female offspring of one of the lords of the underworld, Blood Chief. She grew up down there among the roots and the underground caves and rivers, among the dismemberers, the skinners, the cookers and eaters of flesh. She saw the creation of diseases and war, of pain and of sadness. Every moment of her existence there, the roof of her world leaked with the tears of the suffering above. Often a foul, sulfuric wind blew. At times the gales were so strong as to dismantle every structure erected there below. She had a job, one task for life, to separate the wheat from the chaff. Her fingers were bloody from going over and over every morsel of existence that fell into the underworld and separating any healthy grains from their crusty outer casing. At regular intervals, she would carry baskets of chaff to the underworld river of the dead and dump the husky residue into it to float downriver. Her life was an endless chore of inspecting, introspecting, separating, cleansing, and dumping. An utter recapitulation of every expended moment in creation. In order to walk to this river and dump her loads, she had to pass by a tree that it was forbidden to touch. On one trip to the river, carrying her heavy basket, she noticed that the tree had sprouted small fruits that appeared like little heads or skulls. All of the eyes on the little heads were closed. Several journeys to the river later, she noticed that one of the little heads was peeping at her with half-open lids. After several more journeys, the eyes were open. And after a few more, she heard a whistle. She approached the tree with curiosity, and the little head feigned innocence. She decided she was going to ignore this tree, so as not to get in any trouble. But at random intervals, while walking with her basket to the river, she would hear a small hoot from the tree, even though there were no owls perched on the branches. She was certain that it was one little head, the one that was awake. All the others appeared fast asleep, not even fully formed. Some had eyelids that could not be separated. Others had no real mouths to speak of. But this one little fruit was a fully formed tiny head, and she was certain it was peeking at her, observing her on her path to the river, to and fro, listening for her footfalls and calling out for her from time to time. Little Blood Moon began to think that the head fruit was playing the part of a trickster, and she determined even more insistently to pay it no mind. But one day the little fruit spoke out to her plainly as she walked by. Upa, tst, hey girl, said the little head fruit with wide open eyes. Don Juan then blew a raspberry, blowing air between his tongue and lips. Not only are you a pest, you're rude, said Little Blood Moon as she walked on with her basket. The little head was taken aback. It resolved to try a different tactic on her return. I don't mean to offend, said the little head as she passed by. I'm stuck here for a time, just like you. Wouldn't you at least like someone to talk with you while you finish your work? Finish? When will I ever be finished? Little Blood Moon said. All the more reason, replied the little head. I could be your little friend down here. Little Blood Moon walked over and sat down under the tree with her basket. No one had ever sat down on the roots of that tree before. She looked at her bloody fingers and sighed. The head fruit whistled a haunting tune, and at last she felt some relief. Tell me, why are you doing what you do? Asked the little head. I select the parts of creation that don't work, and I do this alone so that my scene won't be tainted by desires, she said. And what happens to what does work? The little head asked. It ascends somewhere else, she said. What happens to what doesn't work out? Asked the head. The lords of the underworld devour it, and the residue gets dumped into the river of the dead, she said. My fruit survived and sprouted from that, and you work beautifully. Why don't you take some of me and we shall go somewhere else? The head fruit replied. Let them learn from their own disaster down here. Let the twice dead fight it out or be engulfed by their own sewage. As long as they have someone to clean up for them, they won't stop and everyone will suffer for it. I would like to give you something for free and you can decide. If you could do that, it would be wonderful, she said. Don Juan stopped his story for a moment to gauge my reactions. You see, he said, the tree was her secret friend, and it gave her something special, just like you were given something when you played alone in your basement. The little head fruit spit out a seed into her palm and told her to guard it carefully, lest any being try to wrestle it from her. The little head said, I have given you a sign. When a man dies, people become frightened of the bones, but one's essence is not lost. Little Blood Moon took her basket and returned to her place of work, for she was now long missing. The lords of the underworld were all asking, where is the girl who cleans for us and prepares our food? When Little Blood Moon returned, they cornered her and demanded, What have you been doing, girl? Where have you been? Show us what you have in your hand. When she showed them her hand, the seed had been absorbed, and there was a glowing place, like a hole or an eye inside the palm. The lords of the underworld all cried out in fury. She had defiled herself. But Little Blood Moon replied that she had never known the face of a man, which was the truth. Take her away to the house of solitude and night, the lords cried out. Make her tell what has happened to her. But the girl refused, even though she spent all of her time now alone in the dark. Send in the sharp knives to cut into her flesh. Then she will tell us, shouted the lords. But the girl was used to cutting, separating the wheat from the chaff. She was accustomed to bleeding fingers, and so even though they cut at her flesh, she did not tell. Cut out her heart, that we may taste it and thereby know what she has done, screamed the lords of death. But the owls came to the girl and whispered a plan. They did not want to kill Little Blood Moon. Instead, they flew to the sacred copal tree, tree of the nectar of the brain of the gods, and there they formed a heart, dark, red copal sap. They flew with it to the lords of death and said, Here is the heart of Little Blood Moon, which the sharp knives have extracted for you. The lords demanded, Cast her heart into our fire, that we may watch it burn, and the secret design will be revealed to us. The owls cast the fragrant copal sap heart into the fire, and the smoke from it was so aromatic as to mesmerize all the lords and demons of the underworld. The smoke from the copal sap heart wafted and ascended into the upper world, which opened to receive a clean, sacred blessing offering. At this moment of infinite chance, the owls flew to Little Blood Moon and lifted her up on their wings, and with their flight in unison, they elevated her up, up, up into the world above. And that is how the lords of death were defied and defeated, and life in the world rose to this level. It was a woman who tricked them, a young woman, and the blessings of the sacred aromatic sap copal. Don Juan made a gesture of taking off an imaginary hat and tipping it at me with respect. I giggled like a little girl. After a moment of thought, however, I became very disquieted. But that's no consolation. Bringing life to this realm where everyone still has to die, where there is pain and suffering, taxation and struggle, and the only perpetuation of life is that of living on in one's descendants. I felt the extreme pressure of the tragedies I had experienced speaking through me as though I were a medium. I shocked myself by actually arguing with Don Juan. He dismissed my blurting outburst, but not my angst, and he smiled wistfully. A noble sentiment. This understanding of being is exactly why you are here. It leads us to the second part of our tale, that of the sacred hero twins. You see, in our way of seeing, the way of seeing with dream power, a double being or a sacred twin does not die because it contains the capacity to split again, like the egg of an immaculate conception, and to emerge out of the sacred void as another version of itself, or as the sacred marital couple, omiatioto. Such a being is unique, male and female in one, and it cannot be destroyed. I took a deep breath of anticipation as Don Juan began again. This is now the story of the hero twins who defeat death and go beyond their earthly existence into a cosmic being. The primordial double female being of Little Blood Moon has a male aspect, a primordial double male being called the hunter and the jaguar deer. Female Little Blood Moon is the lunar eclipse, the moon and the void simultaneously. Male hunter and jaguar deer are the relentless, skilled seeker and the ferocious yet gentle truth of wisdom. Now when the time was ripe for them to face a male death, they traveled down to the lords of the underworld, Xibalba, from which their feminine aspect had escaped. Although they fought bravely and wisely there, and won each of their battles against the lords of death, still death itself ruled. Seeing this sign in their hearts, they decided that it was time to die to death, and they offered themselves up to the sacrificial fire, asking only that their bones be ground and cast into the river of the dead. There was a great celebration throughout Xibalba because death had won a final victory over man. Then 5 days later, 2 fishermen appeared on the river in their reed boat. They came working miracles. They could burn down a house and raise it back up again. They could sacrifice other beings and even themselves in turn, and then restore everything to wholeness. The lords of the underworld demanded that these fishermen be brought before them to work their wonders so that all could be amazed. So ecstatic was the mysterious resurrection dance of these 2 strangers that the lords of the underworld cried out, "Wonderful! Marvelous! Now sacrifice us and bring us back in the same way." And so the lords of death were sacrificed, and they were not brought back. It was then that the fishermen revealed themselves. We are hunter and jaguar deer, and Little Blood Moon is above. Death will never again be great. And with that, all 3 of these beings ascended into the sky to become its void blackness and its luminous nature and its all-reflecting wisdom. And together they show the way and dreamed the bridge for all sentient beings to cross and follow. My heart pounded as I sat in silence. I almost lost my breath. Don Juan got up quietly and went inside the house to prepare some desert herbs for an evening tea. He had taken an ancient creation story and woven it into my life, and then transcended that with our genuine evolutionary energetic quest, a map, a marriage, and the mystery of a new kind of hope. I was stilled with contemplation and let his words sink as deeply into me as the golden black of the desert sunset that now enveloped the landscape. The following morning, still immersed in the tale, I engaged in the newfound favorite meditative task of raking the desert sand into clean, swirling, energetic language patterns and sacred symbols all around the house, and then of having an early walk. Don Juan was up at dawn, and he had already seen and felt the signs of the day. The wind and the mood had changed. We would be going south, down, deeper into the desert, and we'd see if we could find a longtime acquaintance of his, an old medicine-dreaming woman. About this, he would say no more. I had an eerie feeling about this strange change of the wind's direction, and even more so when we arrived on foot in the small community where we would look for this woman. For one thing, the town was even more deserted than Yuma, if that was possible. Yuma was the site of the Hell of the West, which is still standing, a deliberately remote hewn-stone prison from the days of the westward expansion that housed stagecoach bandits, gunmen, and outlaws. The prison was known in those days for its dark, solitary cell where the prisoner would spend as much as a month underground in total darkness, in utter silence, on bread and water, often in 125-degree heat during the day. I had visited this abandoned prison often with Don Juan during my stays with him, and I thought that I had seen all of Xibalba there, the underworld of the dead and of the living dead. Ha! I hadn't seen the half of it until that particular day when it came walking boldly down the street, right before my eyes, in the form of a tall, dark, elderly native woman wearing a simple black dress with a black head-rag turban and carrying a huge machete. Leaping lizards, I said to myself as I watched her set up shop, boiling corn ears in a wash tub set on an old oil drum filled with smoldering coals. She took severed corn stalks from a burlap sack, and with her machete, she chopped the remaining bits of stalk right off the ears with a whack upon an old wooden crate. This is the woman who has been whispering to you since you were a child, Don Juan said softly. Oh no, I said, thinking that he was kidding. Oh yes, he said. Here she is, the old woman from the basement, the genuine article, the real deal. Welcome to Xibalba. I was dead with terror, yet despite it, I couldn't help my childlike desire to walk a little closer toward her. She was in fact magnificent, lanky, muscular, and hard. She wheeled around and glared at me like a Medusa, but her hair of snakes was all bound up in her head rag. She was really beautiful, so severe. I was in awe of her, but I dared not take another step. I didn't know what to do. She had me pegged with her gaze. I couldn't even consider a false move. I actually bent down and made a gesture of kissing the earth, at which she released me from her stare. She glared at Don Juan. He glared at me, and then something of both of them burned right through me. I felt as though the light from their eyes went nova, lasering me into a new helix. Everything that I was died in me at that very moment, and what was left was a new weave. Perhaps I had always carried it, and they just singed me down to it. Or perhaps I received a transmission that day, or both. But whatever it was, it has remained with me. It has remade my destiny, and it has taken me into the awareness that began prior to and then exists as and beyond the tree of life itself. We never spoke of that experience. It was as though the power of it transcended all words, concepts, systems, and frames of reference. After that day, though, Don Juan and I continually made trips south, and over time, I inched closer to this fierce enigma of steamed and roasted corn. I came to understand that she was highly respected and feared. She was beyond archetypal and was viewed as a powerful medicine person by the limited cognition of everyone near and far. This was not a being anyone would deal with lightly. It took patience and humility to come near her, very much like gaining the tolerance of a wild animal. But gradually, she became accustomed to my presence, although there was never anything that could be taken for granted. I observed the terror and standoffish behavior she caused in everyone in the community when she was out and about. The locals approached her with caution, if at all. One of her town chores was the selling of the corn that she herself harvested and cooked, and those interested in procuring some of it approached her like little children already holding out the exact amount of money required in their hands, as if to avoid any dialogue or need for her to make change. Just pay what you owe. Exactly. That is all. The corn was some of the best I'd ever seen. Huge, long, wide, succulent ears, expertly roasted or steamed. Men had the most difficulty purchasing it. When in her proximity, they actually seemed to lose their tongues at her harsh glare. Young women fared somewhat better, and occasionally managed a mumble and a well-brought-up smile. Nobody passed her bin, brazier, and steaming tub uninterested, however. When my moment finally came to draw close enough to make the appropriate introductions, it was over that washtub of steaming ears. I approached unlike the others, not holding any money in my hand, but very definitely not asking for a handout. I figured that if we were to have any dealings at all, they had to begin on a basis of freedom and mutual respect. She hammered me with her stare and looked me up and down as if to say, "Well?" "That's some very nice corn," I began. "You have an extraordinary skill for growing or selecting it. I have seen you here before, and it's always the most excellent quality, far superior to anything else around." "And?" she asked. "Tell me something I don't already know." "That's all I wanted to say," I gulped. She smirked. It was the first time I'd seen even a hint of the most sardonic of smiles on her face. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked with a warning tone. "No, I'm not, but I do stay in the area nearby now," I replied respectfully. "What do you do?" she challenged. "Nothing. I don't do anything." I had no idea what to say. "Well, I've seen you before, too. What are you up to here?" she retorted. "What are you doing with him?" she asked, jutting her chin toward Don Juan. "Be honest." I certainly had no breath for lies. I would never have even considered it. But it wouldn't have been possible anyway. She definitely had the advantage now, which was rather disorienting and disconcerting. "I'm learning about the medicine of dreaming," I replied. "Don't you already understand?" she insisted mysteriously. "Yes," I agreed. I gasped and rephrased my reply. "I'm deepening that understanding with experiences. I suppose that I am here experiencing." "Yes, that's it." "There's more to it than that," she responded and handed me a steamed ear of corn, expecting me to reach for it. I didn't. "I can't pay with money," I told her. "I didn't bring any of that with me. I am grateful for this, if you mean for me to have it for free. Perhaps I could help you with something instead." And what would that be? She laughed openly and signaled me with her eyes to bite into the juicy golden corn. It was delicious. What could you possibly help me with? She urged me. After tasting the corn, I blurted out, well, for one thing, I'd like to be able to cook corn like this. Maybe I could help you carry and husk it. Trade me a recipe then, she said. What? Trade me one of your best recipes of your design, and you can have that corn. And I'll show you how I grow, select, and prepare it. Come back here at 5 o'clock exactly, and we'll take a walk to my house. You can give me your recipe there, and I'll show you my cornfield. The ominous moment arrived. There was no turning back. At 5 p.m., I was standing like an orphan waif on the corner. She appeared with her machete, and off we went toward her home. She told me to call her Celestina. That was all she said. The walk to Doña Celestina's house was quiet, and it took us across a small wooden footbridge and past several fields of corn that all appeared to be dry-framed. We walked in total silence for a long way, and eventually arrived at a large field on the right-hand side of the road that she indicated with a movement of her machete was her own field. We stepped across the barrier of scrub bushes into the rows of tall green corn stalks. She pulled back the tasseled husk from one very large mature ear to show me that its kernels extended all the way around in rows without missing even one single space, culminating with the final kernel at the tip from which the tassel sprouted. The colors of the kernel were like a rainbow within a cloud, concentrated in some areas and then dissolving in others, with infinite transitions. All of them grow this way, complete with kernels all the way to the end of the cob, she said plainly. When an ear grows this way, it's called the mother corn. And if you take your seed from only such an ear, over time they all grow like these. Look how huge and magnificent these are, and how the colors vary. White shifts to gold and then turns reddish. In the next generations, the dance of colors will evolve and reconfigure like the clouds in the sky to form new patterns different from those that are present in the seed I'll select. How did you get them all to grow so big? I exclaimed. Doña Celestina smirked again. Well, she said, it is true that once long ago, corn was much smaller. She showed me half her pinky finger to indicate its original size. But it has always been very potent, like the ancient earth herself. And if you understand what to look for and how to choose and combine, and if you select only the best examples for seed, then over time, corn grows larger and larger and more powerful and substantial. I've never seen corn quite like this, I said. This corn is very like I am, she replied cryptically. Look, if you see a person with a fine horse, for example, notice the relationship. Is it one of mutual respect and love, freedom and powerful spirits? Or is it a broken relationship of domination and ownership? A trained creature burdened by a petty master, harnessed, restrained, miserable, and possibly even whipped. Just as with the horse, all you really have to do is whisper to corn, and it will start to respond, if you really admire it. There is even a medicine test for young women at puberty who must prove their capacity for regeneration by praying their cornfield into being. A woman who does not pass does not have the qualities that are being searched for to bring freedom into being. She must be free herself. And now, I think you understand that I am going to give you a test. This one will be a little bit tough, a little different. I'd like to see if you can grow whatever you are asked by the spirits to grow, in the same way that one might pray corn into being, and do so freely. There is an intent behind this, but it's not going to be revealed to you yet. For now, I'm just going to insist that you do it. Pray and dream. You say you understand. If you don't, you had better not dare come to see me again. Begin by dreaming that bridge on the road that leads to my field right here, and then later I'll tell you what I'd like for you to do with that. Dream it and walk across it, over and over again. It's that simple. Come to town and see me regularly, only to show me how your dreaming is going, and then bring me what is on the other side of the bridge when you cross it. I am not interested in anything else about you for the moment, and I'm not going to take you on farther to my house today. Instead, I'm going to leave you in my field. I want for you to smell the corn pollen. When you feel totally saturated with it, walk back across the bridge and go your way. Don't you want the recipe you asked me to share with you in exchange for this trip to your field and the corn you gave me? I inquired, totally mystified, meek, and taken aback by her forcefulness. She was as strong when she spoke as when she was silent. Your dreaming is the recipe I'm asking you for. It is one of your best. I'm not going to tell you just yet why I'm asking you for it. Now go. And with that, Doña Celestina moved like a strong wind through her field, harming nothing and carrying the large machete at her side. She disappeared in a southwesterly direction, heading toward what I could only suppose was her house, somewhere off in the distance. Practice 2. Dream your bridge and walk across it. 1. This is an energetic crossing practice, a multi-dimensional practice that will carry you to the next level and into the infinite possibilities of benevolent intent and being. Begin by intending to see a bridge in dreaming. Dream that same bridge over and over again, each night. 2. Now awaken with the dream to become lucid, fully aware within that dreaming, fully cognizant that you are dreaming, and capable of acting with awakened intent. 3. Lucidly examine every detail of the bridge and intend improvements, such as stability, beauty, environmental aesthetic harmony, and cleanliness if need be. Lucidly intend a benevolent golden light surrounding the bridge. That was 4. 5. Dream that you cross the bridge, fully awake in heightened awareness, walking easily and lightly all the way to the other side. 6. Search for visions of this bridge in the waking world and find them. You will be guided to them by your own energetic body, in the same way a homing pigeon is guided. 7. When you have found your bridge in the waking world, first honor it quietly, privately, and then walk across it in exactly the same manner as you walked across in dreaming. 8. Do this often. Bon voyage. Chapter 3. Evolutionary Revolution. When I first crossed the bridge in dreaming, I could see ceremonial and evolutionary warfare on the other side. The ritual war was waged by the living and the dead. The purpose was to be or not to be, and to realize or not to realize the original intent of creation. Upon recounting my first perceptions of these experiences across the dreaming bridge to Don Juan and Doña Celestina, they immediately shifted their teaching stances with me and started to toughen and train me in the tools and tactics of genuine, energetic, and spiritual warriorship. My time with them became a rigorous boot camp filled with multi-dimensional obstacle courses, priority tasks, and sacred security clearances. First, I started trance walking and running. The human-speaking natives along the Colorado River all had individuals that they called spirit runners, persons who could run night and day for 2, 3, possibly even 4 days straight on minimal water and dried meat. These individuals had once served a vital purpose as the message relay system between peoples before and during the Spanish explorers. The male puberty initiation had consisted, and still did consist, in part, of 4 days of trance running. I preferred to walk vigorously, but I trained to run a bit as well, in silence. And soon I was able to enter a focused walking trance that Olympic athletes called the zone. The sought-after state of optimum efficiency and excellent ability that allowed me to walk rapidly as much as 15 to 25 miles straight on a daily basis, with only intermittent thoughts, no food, and little water. Additionally, I was assigned the task of impeccable cleaning preparations for sacred ceremonies. I undertook the chores of cleaning floors, clothing, and ceremonial cloths, walls, windows, and sacred mirrors, altars, tables, the ceremonial spaces, ritual serving items, healing stones, herbs and feathers, and by offering sacred aromatic essences and smokes, even the air itself. From this, I graduated to raking energetic designs in the perfectly cleansed sand outside the ceremonial spaces, and then selecting certain items required for the specific ceremony and particular energetic work. From there, I went on to preparing and cooking some sacred concoctions and essences for the ritual participants and the energies. Then I began actually receiving the ceremonial energies into my body from a state of prepared emptiness and commenced designing elements of the ceremonies. I began to arrange and blend magical configurations of energy, sacred substances, and space for empowerment and transcendental effects. I explored sacred geometry and architecture, direction, color, vapors, light, essences, music, rhythm, movement, chant, and invocation. I also studied a form of medicine song that does not have words. The words and melody of this kind of song come from the Twilight language of dreaming. They are understood only by the power of the dream, which is called in with the singing. Don Juan then advised me to deepen and lengthen my silences, and to empty my throat of all preconceived notions in preparation, so as to be a vehicle for energy. Likewise, my head and my womb had to be emptied as well. I undertook a period of voluntary celibacy in combination with endless days and nights of disciplined, blessed silence. If ever my mind began to wander rather than to receive energy directly, either Don Juan or Doña Celestina would appear as if out of nowhere and snap their fingers. During these days and nights, I functioned entirely without any artificial noises or false electric lighting, and there was always a dreaming task when I went to bed at night. A task admonishing me to dive deeper into the work that I was doing and into what I was not doing. Beyond this, they both encouraged me to foster a solitary nature. Don Juan asked me to observe the behavior of the canyon pumas who never had any company and always hunted alone, elegantly. I did so on my own, following their nocturnal tracks in the early daylight hours. Each of my mentors deliberately presented themselves to me as an archetypal solitary being, and they asked that I be in the world, but not of it. Wherever I was, seeing patterns in life and in cognitive agreements, and seeing into energy directly. I followed Don Juan's example and took to sitting alone in one of his favorite haunts, Lutz Casino, a 19th century period pool hall where one could view every aspect of life that straggled in from the hot desert. From the comfort of the air-conditioned shadows, no place on earth has ever told me more about humans. The task of crossing the bridge in dreaming was a nightly proposition that I followed, and I was also instructed to dig. I was spurred to uncover what lies beneath and behind all things without violating, destroying, or contaminating in any manner. When I was deep enough, as my mentors put it, when I was ready. Don Juan and Doña Celestina then began bringing me items of ritual warfare, bones and dried skins, knives, ancient carvings, and such. They would ask me to hold the bone, wear the skin, brandish the knife, or touch the carving. And then they would ask me, "Tell me, what is the story of that?" They sent me down so deep that I could actually see the dead walking around like the living and talk with them about their battles and messages. I could do this soberly, as if it were a natural thing while I went about my daily non-ordinary business. The locals became somewhat wary of me then and steered clear of me for a time. I started to gain a reputation as a person with medicine. Even after their instincts sensed that this energy was very benevolent and ultimately meant them no harm, some still remained quite apprehensive and tentative for a time, but they eventually warmed to me. I could genuinely hear the undertones in every word spoken or left unspoken. They would all sink like stone into water, down into another level of communication and consciousness. I could pierce their delusions and slice through them like a hot knife through butter. I could illuminate my vision of the depths and see the treasure within different levels of being. "Don't be afraid of it," Don Juan would say to me. "This is a part of what you are." One night I awakened into dreaming to find myself outfitted for war. I was dressed like a ninja or a member of the special forces, all in black with a black ski mask over my face and my head topped with a black beret. My footsteps fell silently and I carried a huge machete. Suddenly I found myself surrounded by jungle and tribal peoples, all moving in a dance of possession to the beat of their drums and enticing me to come closer. A fire ceremony was in progress deep within a clearing, and those who wished to see the world to come would have to go into the fire. There were two men that I spied within the throngs who were nearest to the central ceremonial fire. One was seated and guarding it as if he presumed to own it. The other one lay dead, rotting. The seated man was an ashen blonde. He turned to welcome me as I approached the fire, and without any remorse or hesitation, I decapitated him on the spot, hacking him into bloody pieces with the machete. Then I mounted the second man, who was a brunette, the one who was lying dead, and with tremendous excitation, I began to undulate over his sexual organ. The fire spread until we were engulfed in its flames. He actually climaxed, as did I, and then he began to revive and recover his life. I grasped his hand. We crossed the fire and stalked out of the jungle until we came upon an abandoned hut. I entered it. Inside the structure on a bare table, I found an old military radio that was transmitting. Others from the primal fire dance approached the hut, but they could hear nothing. I was the only one who could hear the transmissions or correctly decipher the messages. When I awakened from dreaming into my everyday awareness, I found that Don Juan was already dressed for the day in his World War II military surplus khakis. Following the synchronicity, I walked into town alone later in the morning and easily homed in on several radios like the one I had dreamed, waiting to be found on the shelves of the local Army-Navy surplus store. That night when I entered into dreaming again, I had a glimpse of who or what was on the other end of the radio, but Don Juan admonished me never to reveal that detail. I couldn't help but be reminded of an experience I had as a girl traveling on a bus to visit my grandmother. On the long trip, I was seated next to a blind woman for half the journey. She held a multi-band radio in her arms as though it were her lover. "Whenever I'm alone, I can listen to my radio," she had said to me. "I love my radio. It tells me things you could never imagine. I have no one in my life. My family doesn't understand me. All I have is my radio, forever." She had said this honestly, and it had left an indelible mark on me. Now, I was faced with the radio. As the ferocious woman warrior I can see you're going to be, Don Juan said to me the next day, it would be appropriate for you to learn some things directly from Celestina de la Soledad, which means Celeste of Solitude, or Solitary Celeste in English. Don Juan made this comment on the afternoon that followed my dreaming. As we continued along the 20-mile trek to her house, I was still thinking of the radio. I don't envy you, having to stay here with her, but she will take you very, very deep, he went on. She has a hard, clean edge, that one, and it will do you good to hone your own with it. You will sharpen her as well, so it's not all for nothing that she does this. It's not as though she gets nothing out of the deal, taking you in. But just remember this, that no matter what you learn from her, and mark me, you'll learn well. Ultimately, you're not like her. She'll never own you, and you won't own her when it's all over. She's aware of that, and if you really live your truth, she won't feign otherwise. Not everyone has that advantage. Be mindful of it. You're simply not going to become what she is. That is all. There is no judgment in that. It's just so. You have your own path. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget that, he said. I never will, I promised. Doña Celestina's home was beyond that footbridge that I dreamed so often. When I finally saw it, it lay at the outskirts of the small town we had visited, which was actually on the Mexican side of the border. The area was so deserted that there were no border markings or any kind of disputes, not even over water, because there wasn't that much to contest. To live in this area, one had to sink a well for water, which could be found in odd places, and this was not particularly conducive to town planning. The house was solitary, small, and austere. A rectangular adobe construction with a kitchen, altar room, sitting room, and bedroom in the front, and several more bedrooms and a rustic bath in the back around a central patio, where the well water and the ceremonial fire pit could be accessed. I was given a bedroom in the back area when I arrived, and it was understood that that would be my room whenever I visited. The immediate sense I had of the place was that of a convent without the influence of Christianity. There was nothing around except fields, mostly dry farmed maize. You couldn't even see the nearest house, although there was one about a mile away within a stand of mesquite trees. It was a couple of miles to town. As for wildlife, there were occasional deer, rabbits, and coyotes, hawks, quails, grackles, crows, ravens, and turkey vultures, a colorful hummingbird now and then, and rattlesnakes and lizards, and, as I later learned, even a very few mountain lions that dwelled in the nearby dry water canyons. Jimson weed, creosote, and ephedra were the most abundant wild desert plants, all of which had medicinal value. The bean of the mesquite is edible, and there was plentiful native corn. Some of the neighbors kept bees. Mostly it was totally silent, except for the bird song. Why do you live alone out here so far from the town? I asked Doña Celestina the first night of my stay with her, as I was unpacking my rucksack. The isolation of the lone structure gave me a creepy sensation at first. The dim candlelight flickered on the bare walls. Do you think I'm too old and frightening to be alone? She challenged me. Does it scare you that in fact the older I get, the more independent I become, and the less company I seek? Well, I'm strong. This is certainly what I prefer. Oh, and I get visitors out here. She jutted her jaw at me and lurched forward in the shadows. I live far from the town because I can't stand the way that socialized women are taught to behave. I see through all that now. It's pure puny crap. Energetically, they're like enslaved children chained at the womb in a dungeon. All most of them know how to do is make more of themselves. At best, they're accomplished. Very few can cure or do more. Some can clean up and so well like convicts rehabilitating in jail, and so they're vain. Many just become shoppers and cooks, and all they want is for everyone to eat up. I smirked. Doña Celestina was even more dark and misanthropic than I had anticipated. You think that my view is odd, don't you? I'm not joking. Is there no end to the appetite? While you're here with me, I hope to show you that I am one of the very few women walking around with a clear head. I'm getting stronger. What about you? I don't care a damn about your unholy idea of me, mind you, so forget that. But I would like for you to absorb some of what I've learned from experience. Let's start with fucking, she said bluntly. I was ready for that topic. All you young girls, you young women, and even some older women who ought to know better, all you ever think about is how to get a pecker inside, how to make a baby, or how to get a man to do whatever you want. Your disgusting education revolves around how successful you are at that, or how hard you have to work for it. There is no thought given to the fact that having a baby can kill. It's not something to be taken lightly. In many cases, there is just no need for it. Most children conceived are ordinary in the extreme because the intent that conceived them was flimsy. And let's not even talk about the numbers. Women aren't taught about pleasure apart from the act that will cause conception, or apart from the pleasures of consumption, or of money and the so-called advantages it buys. Then they teach this to their offspring. They live like scavengers, victims, and dependent, kept things. They aren't taught about their own power, that they can do for themselves, about the fact that almost everything on earth that is of the flesh comes from them now. They aren't admonished to consider the joy and the suffering that little detail encompasses. They are totally attached, slaves who breed slaves. They understand so little of mature love. It's all about parenting, even parenting their partner, and then marrying their child. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed, and I laughed nervously from horror. She was just so dead on and relentless, threatening. I was about to pee myself from fear and hysteria. Doña Celestina grimaced and looked at me as though I were crazy for a moment. What, you think this is a party? You think I'm joking? Are you nuts? Look around. Look at the mess that life on this earth is, and sober up. She walked out of the room and left me trembling at my own thoughts. Doña Celestina's home was another place entirely at night. Once all the candles were blown out, it seemed to fill with a watery energy and become a bottomless well. The areas around all the edges softened and almost disappeared. They expanded immensely with fluidity, rippling like large sponges living at the bottom of the ocean. Owls would come to perch in the nearby shadowy mesquite trees, and their rounded tones would float down into the patio like enormous descending bubbles. I eventually followed Doña Celestina into her altar room, where she did work by candlelight late into the night. She was seated at a heavy, bare wooden table going through a pile of dried roots that appeared to be American mandrakes. She looked up at me and motioned for me to take a seat in a rough-hewn, straight-backed chair across the table from her. The war you dreamed is genuine. The adversary is any part of our being, living or dead, that falters from the task of originality in a cowardly delusion that keeps us from reaching the ultimate intent of all this, she said, motioning out onto the patio toward the sky. It is a war from within, a war with the petty, ignorant, misinformed social self. And very few of us have the guts to stop suckling at the poisoned tit and fight it. It doesn't matter that all are dying and mutilating themselves with the cure. It's no good trying to conceive the cultural consensus. It's like talking council diplomacy with an infant or a bully. And these are what our petty natures can be. Deep down, such nature is just a big, angry, poor baby coward that doesn't want any change that's not in its limited favor. It can accept no concept it can't reflect. Nothing it hasn't heard of with its pea-brained, self-worshipping mind. I know you're thinking that no one has ever spoken to you this way before. Who thinks and talks like this after all? I can tell you that as a young woman, I was a practicing midwife for a time, and I have seen all the stupidity there is to see. Now that I have grown, and I am much older, I like to think of myself as a wiser woman who is a midwife for life moving toward its transition, toward a quality evolution, not into the senseless assembly line of pointless reproduction and consumption. Reproduction, you see, means making more of the same, and it breaks the upward evolution if there is too much physical consumption because of too much carnal birth. Birth should be at the most auspicious replacement level only. Ack, I've had about enough of the same old tedious repetition, haven't you? As with anything, if you make too much of it, it eventually suffers in quality, and that is definitely what we have among the human race. Oh, some of them masquerade in more attractive costume, and their teeth last a little longer. But look at the ultimate results. On the inside, they are just a house of cards. She punctuated her statement by blowing the powdery dirt from the cleansed roots off the table and onto the cement floor. You're right. What can we do? I gasped. It's very simple. Stop fucking. Stop the penetration. She inserted her right index finger into the hole formed by the encircled fingers of her left hand. Both sexes can still have pleasure and reach a higher wisdom. Revolt. Evolve. Women have the reproductive and the evolutionary control, and they shouldn't have to take it at the last minute with abortion or pills. There are other paths to pleasure besides penetration. Women control the wombs. They can use that. They can put the brakes on and should be more selective. They have the capacity to focus on quality rather than quantity. Women will compete with one another for even the most pitiful dick on the planet. They need to stop doing that. If they would work together and support one another in this revolution, the whole world would turn around like that. She snapped her fingers. I have young, destitute girls who come to learn from me whenever they can find me. And when I get through with them, they are self-sufficient and dignified, and they understand how to empower women's councils. You can bet on it. They don't seek their power through a borrowed pecker or merely through motherhood. These young women, educated and initiated or otherwise, are currently not the majority feminine population. So other women also need to see and change their way of being. They are very open to it, if caught at exactly the right moment. And you, my dear, have been caught at such a time. There is no going back for you. I do not despise the male energy, quite the contrary, she went on. However, it takes good females to bring good earthly males into the world, if such is the need. Where do you think they come from, Mars? Perhaps a few. Right now, we certainly don't need to make more. We need to make better, or not at all. Sexuality is not intended only to be domination and surrender, and love is a call to ripen. Neither imply the necessity of wanton reproduction and endless ejaculations, especially not under less than optimal conditions. We have an obligation to seek completeness, and that is not achieved simply by having ourselves into pair bonds. Humanity is chained to a carnal agreement, which can be broken or evolved. The male doesn't need to be satisfied, she clarified. In fact, any high-quality courtesan will tell you that to satisfy them totally is the worst thing one can do. Then they become complacent. Males need to strive, to go on hero quests and warrior's vision quests, and undergo rites of passage that earn them the right to be males, not the boys with potential that their mothers brought them into the world to be. And not all women are born to be mothers. Some were designed to be evolutionary consorts. Mothers are the favorite of boys, but the evolutionary consort will always be the favorite of the autonomous male. It is only natural. Such a consort is endlessly challenging and stimulating. You are not going to be a biological mother, she said bluntly. I can tell you that right now. Don't weep over it. You're missing nothing. Look for your happiness in truly mature, autonomous male and female nature, and even beyond that, in the sacred, the unique marriage, the union of both as one being. You're wandering in a forest of little boys and girls, housed in partially adult bodies. You find yourself in a field of flowers, all with underdeveloped sexuality. These are sexual cripples. And you are just waking up to the horror that this is the condition of almost the entire planet, and you are not like that. So, you feel very much alone. I am here to show you that one can live alone with strength and dignity. You don't have to be afraid of it. You don't have to huddle in a squat shack with a roof that is too low just so that you won't die alone. Just because you are not one of these maimed partial creatures living with an illusion of false perfection. You are like a unicorn in a corral with mules, and you do not have to be one of them. It takes courage to be unique. Dare to do it. Try it. We all die alone anyway. It is liberating to know that clinging to one another does not change the fact that death comes to meet each one of us as an individual instance. That is even a good thing. I wouldn't want anyone else's death. Would you? I like to take my own chances, thank you very much. Don't sell me anything from anyone else, and don't you buy it. It wouldn't be good enough for you anyway. Doña Celestina had just taken my whole view of life from the cradle to the grave and thrown it into the garbage can. She was correct, though. It was liberating. What an iconoclast. However, I couldn't help but wonder what I was going to do with my life now that I was not going to engage in what everyone else does. Somehow, through the shock, I had the revelation that I was staying with her there to begin to explore just that. And yet, as Don Juan had told me, I would not be a carbon copy of her, for I had my own path. I lay thinking about it all night. In the morning, I heard voices out in front of the house. I dressed, and after serving myself some tea from the kitchen, I peeked out the door of the sitting room to see who was visiting. There were 2 wooden chairs placed outside under the mesquite trees. Doña Celestina was sitting in one of them, somber, and a man of medium build and short stature with wavy hair was seated in the other. He seemed to notice me peering at them from the doorway and motioned for me to feel confident and come outside. Doña Celestina turned to give me a hard glance, but she did not seem to feel that I was intruding. I had a hard time perceptually processing this man after her insights, but there was something I liked about him. Still, my feelings concerning him were very far from ordinary. He was middle-aged. He seemed jovial and intelligent, and he had dark, thick hair that was touched ever so lightly with gray. His eyes were very pleasant. They were sweet and reminded me of the color of warm molasses. He stood up and extended his hand to me. I shifted my teacup into my left hand to accept his. The handshake was very sincere. "I'm Carlo Castano," he said. "I went to see Don Juan this morning, and I heard all about you. I've just come from there. I thought I'd come and see for myself. See what? I asked, genuinely curious. Carlo smiled sardonically. He put his hand on his hip and imitated my tone. Why, you see, of course, make your acquaintance, if you don't mind. His inflection was comical. I feel better now that you're here. I certainly don't mind. I wondered why I would. It's very nice to meet you, I added, sipping my tea. Do you have a name? He nudged. Mary Madeline, I said. My friends call me Merilyn. That's lovely. How about if I call you Mem? Something just between us. Yes, all right. His English definitely had a touch of an accent. Carlo is on his way to Jalisco, Doña Celestina said. He's driving down toward Guadalajara today. There is a ceremony there that he's been invited to attend. It's a long drive, and he'd like some company. He's inviting you to go with him. If you ride along, you'll be invited to the ceremony. You've already completely unpacked, haven't you? You can leave some of your things here, and when the ceremony is completed, Carlo will bring you back. That is, if you'd like to go with him. If you do decide to go, just take enough clothing for a few days. You need to make a decision right now because he has to get on the road again soon. I looked at Carlo. He shrugged his shoulders hopefully. I thought about my bizarre night and the long conversation with Doña Celestina. I gazed at Carlo and then followed my heart. What kind of a fellow was he anyway? Just give me a moment to collect whatever you suggest that I bring, I said. You've made a good choice, Doña Celestina said. You'll benefit from the ceremony and the experience. You'll learn something, and you'll be even more ready to work when you return. I suggest that you stop along the way and buy a good jacket. It will get cold if you go up into the mountains or stay outside in the high desert during the night. Oh, and Carlo, I am asking you to be on your best behavior, Doña Celestina said cryptically with understated emphasis. Carlo smirked and cringed. I went into the back to pack some slacks and blouses. Within a few minutes, I had returned, and Carlo had pulled his car around to the front of the house. The passenger door was open wide, and he was standing outside it, waiting for me. I got inside his vehicle, and he shut the door gently. When he came around to enter his side and start the ignition, he gave me a smile, a wink, and a sigh of anticipation. I think you're really going to enjoy this, he said, and we started away. Carlo didn't talk much about himself during the drive, and I didn't tell him much about myself either. For me, it was enough that he was acquainted with and trusted sufficiently by Don Juan to be told of my whereabouts. Carlo liked to be read poetry aloud when he drove long distances. He had come prepared, so I looked through the collection he had in the back seat until I found something that suited my taste. I selected verse by St. John of the Cross. I had completed a double major in comparative religion and philosophy and language while at university, and so I came by my choice honestly. I thought that particular selection would be more passionately read by me aloud, as nothing is worse than listening to a monotonous rendition of beautiful poetry. Carlo seemed to be surprised but pleased with my choice. He listened carefully as I measured the musical tempo and the heart-filled explorations of exquisite ecstatic flight and vision. Ecstasy was my area of emphasis in the study of global spirituality. Women are often repressed in religion, but the sincere ecstatic experience is one domain where all will stand back and let the woman have it. I was quite in my element reading the verse and actually rather impressed with his good taste in prose and thought. Finally, the verse carried me away. Carlo would comment from time to time. His command of his second language, English, was impressive. He seemed fairly gifted in his own tongue as well, and gave me the distinct impression that he was quite familiar with a wide variety of regional Spanish and Latin American accents. He was a very good mimic and focused in his conversation, highly comical and most entertaining. He asked me if I could sing too. I do, but I declined to do so that day. for I couldn't think of an appropriate song for the road. We were a little giddy from our enthusiasm. Doña Celestina was correct. It was a very long drive, and I could see why he had requested the company. Slowly, the Sonoran Desert began to be flanked to the east by the bluish mountains of the Bacatete Sierra Mountain Range, and after that the foliage became more lush and the air more fresh. It was about a 12-hour ride to Guadalajara, but Carlo told me we weren't going all the way down to the city. Instead, we were going to turn east near the Mezcal territory and head for a small Huichol town by the name of Tuxpan. From there, we would all go to the ceremony. We stopped in the very pleasant town of Tepic for a bite to eat in an outdoor restaurant near the town square, right before we headed east. Carlos said that they had a good public market, so we leisurely walked there afterward to procure a warm woven jacket, as Doña Celestina had recommended. We saw a Huichol shaman standing near the herbal section of the market. When we got back into the car, Carlos started to tell me a little about where we were going. "I don't want to say much," Carlo began. "Do you know anything about the Huichol Indians and their ceremonies?" "Not that much," I replied. "I certainly know enough to be respectful." "Well, you may learn quite a bit. Everything will depend on the shaman as to how much they let you see and participate," he said. "But I'm going at the shaman's invitation, so I think this could be a very fortunate experience for you." "Thank you for asking me along," I replied sincerely. "The ceremony won't begin until tomorrow, and we will arrive very late tonight. So if you like, you can just relax now. I feel a surge of energy and will make the rest of the drive without incident." It was very late, past midnight, when we pulled into the town of Tuxpan. The shaman, Don Jose, greeted us and invited us up to his compound. The Kaliwe, the central ceremonial hut of the village, was active, and the flames of the original fire spirit, grandfather fire spirit, Tatawari, burned within it, tended by another shaman. Don Jose already had some pallets laid out for us. He seemed to have been anticipating us both, which I thought was unusual. Carlo lay down to rest, and as he did so, Don Jose pulled me aside. "You know," Don Jose said, "if you want to participate, you'll have to have a dream and tell me everything you see in it." He didn't tell me what kind of dream I was supposed to have, and I knew better than to ask. Don Jose merely indicated that I was to take my place on my pallet and rest now. I fell quickly into dreaming. Carlo was snoring softly on the pallet beside mine, laid out on the earthen floor under a thatched ramada outside the shaman's hut. I awakened into dreaming to see thousands of disembodied eyes all around me, peering at me from every direction. It was so startling that I jumped up off my pallet and ran to the Kaliwe. The fire from within was the only light in the village. Grandfather Fire was being kept company by several young shamans, several older shamans called Maraakames, and Don Jose, the oldest of them all. Don Jose looked up at me standing in the doorway and motioned for me to come to the fire. "Did you dream?" he asked. "Tell me everything you saw." "Oh, the agony of all those disembodied eyes," I blurted out. "I think they were ancestors watching me, watching all of us." Don Jose looked at me approvingly and nodded his head. "She can participate," he announced to all present, and so it was. The ceremony for the men was going to take place within a sacred cave, a place of feminine power, like a womb space for the male shamans. Another group of shamans, young novices, and medicine women were traveling to a place of male power, a sacred mountain called Wirikuta. I was to be taken to the mountain. In the morning, the two groups of ceremonialists were preparing themselves for their trips to the sacred sites. Carlo had been invited to join the group of males going down into the cave. "Don't be frightened, Mem," he said. "Don't worry. You can trust this. We'll each receive what is required. I'll take you away after it's all over." He looked at me firmly in the eyes for a long moment to let me understand that come what may, he meant what he said. We went our ways with last glances at each other. My group heading to the mountain was already piling into several trucks. The travel to both of the intended ceremonial destinations, combined with all the required final preparations, and then the specific ceremonies enacted there, would last for approximately 3 days. The 2 ceremonies of the sacred cave and the sacred mountain would occur concurrently. Both groups were going to travel part of the way on foot as a penance. For our group, the foot travel would begin when we reached a sacred river that we'd cross after receiving a blessing from the Maraakame, Don Jose, who was going with us. From that crossing at the river, we would proceed toward the top of the sacred mountain, passing through peyote fields along the way. The shaman would gather an abundance of the peyote cactus, or hikuri, tracks of the magical deer. And then all of us were going to climb up to the top of the peak, hauling it. And at a designated site, we were to make offerings. Our group drove almost without stopping the first day and night, and we crossed the river early at dawn the next morning. There were many prayers and confessions offered among the Huichol at the banks of that river before Don Jose painted their faces with sun symbols made with a natural yellow paint, freshly pounded from a local root. The sparkling peyote desert appeared like no other. The scrub there was brawny with low rambling thorny bushes, surrounded by pebbles near their roots. Each bush had its own small territory, and many twinkled with a ring of little thornless cacti nestled flush with the ground underneath their branches, almost like fairy rings. The embedded circular heads of the sacred cacti ranged in diameter from about 1/2 to 3 inches across. They were bluish-greenish gray and naturally pie-sectioned into 5, 7, or occasionally even more spongy little segments with a tuft of hair in the very center of each button. I stood open-mouthed, leaning over to look at a nickel-sized button from which I actually heard whispering, humming, or a crackling like a telegraph wire or a transistor radio. Don Jose came over to me and patted me on the back. "You're just like me," he said, sensitive. "All you have to do is smell their little hairs. You just smell their pollen, and up you go." He pointed his index finger to the sky. He then gestured toward the sacred mountain in the distance. It was a huge, jagged blue peak with a distinctly perceptible natural stone formation, like a throne or a slab, which appeared to be covering an entrance at the summit. A huge blast of wind rushed out of that very spot, and from miles away it pounded me almost instantly, as though the hermetically sealed doorway into another dimension had been opened, just as soon as I gazed upon it. That place was sentient, and it focused on the feeling of being touched by my eyes with awareness. The wind gusted and grabbed my attention like a chokehold at the throat. It had me. That particular point on the mountain cemented my gaze deliberately. It was definitely the living abode, the footstool, or the gateway of a spirit. I felt something ooze down my throat and squeeze at the pit of my stomach. Whatever it was, held me transfixed. Then the wind receded, and the sun shone from behind an evaporating morning cloud. The colors on the mountain changed to a pale rosy shade of stone. I could breathe and move my eyes. Don Jose was walking through the fields with a long stick, pointing out the tracks of the magical deer to younger Huichol men, who scrambled to dig the small cacti out. There was a twinkle in the old shaman's eyes as he looked at me from time to time, a twinkle that matched the playful, impish mood of the sparkling peyote and the morning breeze that now flirted with us from out of nowhere. Huge burden baskets filled with the conical peyote cacti, roots and all, were loaded onto the backs of the younger Huichol men. I have no idea how I climbed that sacred mountain with those men and women. The next thing I knew, we were all at the top, and the wind was rushing down. From our eagle-eye vantage point, we scanned the fields of peyote. The wind shouted in my ears unceasingly. It surrounded me and whipped around us. Its motion and light play projected momentary perceptions onto the blank fields of my vision below. I was as high as a kite, and I have no explanation for how I got that way. I don't know how I got down the mountain either. I don't remember climbing down after the first step or two. The next thing I knew, it was night, and we were all sitting around a big sacred fire. We were completely outside of linear time. There were no transitions. The Huichol were chomping away on peyote cactus and singing, and I could understand everything they said in their language. I laughed at the exact moment everyone else did, every single time, without the slightest verbal cue. The Huichol told me then that I was having conversations with God. It seemed like a good explanation. All of the extraordinary experiences were shared and were validated. No one was imagining anything. There was no need to. Imagination wouldn't have been nearly as interesting or as profound. There was this circle of light around everything we perceived, as though we were inside a bubble that was taking us on a journey to exactly where it had designated we would go. Time and space were only in context within the bubble, which could rearrange itself instantly, at will, without causing disorientation. Nothing was linear. Nothing repeated itself, and yet there was a circular quality. We were joyful, inspired, enlightened, and wondrous, and we were filled with a longing all at the same time. I was so alive, I ached, and so detached and liberated, I floated gleefully. There was an awareness that all moments come to an end, and a sense of timelessness and eternity, paradoxically. Time was malleable and responded to intent, but then just relaxed of its own will and let itself be carried away like a sailboat in the wind, or like a hawk soaring freely on a newfound thermal current. It was possible to move the awareness in any direction, forward or backward, above, below, within, or around and around, and to touch anything in spirit, no matter what the distance. This touch might occur after a period of traveling with the awareness, or calling with the heart and mind, or sometimes it would simply be instantaneous, simultaneous with the intent. I awoke in the morning after the all-night fire ceremony without ever having gone to sleep. The fire was out without ever having burned down. All I felt was love. That was everything and nothing. It was the distilled essence. There was no condition for it and no needed object of it. There was no anchor for it in time or space. I had no words, no thoughts, no hopes, no expectations, no desires. Life was a surprise, and I wasn't fooled. I didn't think I'd ever see Carlo Castano again, or anyone else. I was sad and liberated, and thus joyful. I didn't think I'd ever eat again, or go to the toilet again, or brush my teeth, and if I did, I wasn't going to believe any of it. That was my determination. These things did occur, but I kept to my promise not to believe. They were illusory and temporal, not an all-encompassing intent. In the case of Carlo, however, I couldn't help but enjoy being with him. Our raggedy band had a long drive back from the sacred mountain, Wirikuta. The peyote-laden burden baskets, followed by the Huichol themselves, were piled into the flatbed trucks. I sat in the front seat with the old shaman Don Jose. We seemed to rate this seat next to the driver, a middle-aged, husky Huichol man. Don Jose sat there because of his elder shamanic status and because he had made many a pilgrimage entirely on foot. And I sat there, perhaps because I was the only one who had never conceived of making such a journey before. The world was not real. We were not real. We simply did what was natural. If I ever have to say that I loved Carlo Castano from the first moment I laid eyes on him, I suppose that now is the time to do it. There was something about him, being one with that cave, and at the same time that I was on top of the sacred mountain, that made his presence forever indelible in me. I could see him, feel him, trust him, in essence touch him, like a mist or a cloud or a floating pool, as though the whole expanse of sky and our entire existential realities were nothing but the vaporous opening to that deep, sacred cavern, and my being. My heart did nothing else but receive that open doorway upon the shimmering summit of spirit. Everywhere I looked, there was void, filled with his presence and fragrant vapors. My sight, my essence was as wide open as the sky, and every direction was a different, even an infinite variation of that same intended destiny, always new, never lost, filled with endless possibilities. How can one explain such things? It's not possible. We came to the determination that it would be very difficult to talk about what we had experienced. Words were not sufficient. It wasn't something that knowledge could encompass or express. We could feel it. We could sometimes see it. We could move more deeply into it. We could go with it and intend toward it, and we could communicate within it. But explanations were like clouds shifting in the sky, as impermanent as that, and yet for brief moments as utterly tangible. Although he expressed to me what happened in that cave 1,000,000 times plus one, each time it was something different, ancient and new, and all true. There is no way to know what it was. There's no history for it. Likewise, I have never recounted my experience on the mountain the same way twice. Carlo used to say, "We've never lied or made anything up. We've never even come close to describing it. Can't we work together on this? We don't even know what it was ourselves." That was the succinctly put truth of it. When our group had returned to the village, Carlo was already snoring away in one of the huts at the canyon's edge. His group had been back for several hours. I settled into that grouping of huts myself. Clouds were drifting right past the rim of the canyon, through the abyss. They were traveling through open hut windows and beneath the ramadas. The old shaman, Don Jose, gave me a hand-woven blanket to roll up in, and soon afterward, all of existence dissolved. In the morning, I found a book on Tibetan dreaming practices called Dzogchen that Carlo had put near my head as I slept. It had been there by me most of the night, and it was intended as a silent gesture from him. I realized that morning that I had discovered something very profound, yet I couldn't express it. Evolution in our understanding, moving toward experiencing the essence and the ultimate intent of creation and existence, means a new conception of what it is to be alive, to love, and to die. Nothing can be the same, not even time. The perceptions and the possibilities of the whole of our manifest being have to awaken to this ultimate intent and change upon awakening. Practice 3. Dream Quest. 1. For this practice, you need to select a solitary mesa or a flat-top mountain. You must climb to the top and prepare to spend the night under the open sky, within a sacred circle of stones or a circle of ceremonial ash, which you circumscribe at twilight in an auspicious clearing with a good celestial perspective. 2. From the moment the circle has been prepared and you are within it until dawn, do not leave the circle. Take care of all your bodily functions beforehand, and be conscious of your diet and beverage intake for several days prior to this offering, so as to give your body the best possible advantage. Eat and drink sparingly on the evening of the dreaming. 3. Lie flat on your back within the circle, wrapped in a warm blanket or bedroll, and gaze with a soft focus up into the night sky until you enter dreaming. Your head should be facing east. 4. The intent is set to receive energy and guidance from your offering. Hold this intent without wavering as your levels of awareness shift. It is helpful to visualize the head of a comet, followed by its coma, entering into your body from the sky through the crown of your head as you move more deeply into trance levels and the intended dreaming. 5. Each time you awaken into or sink into a different level of awareness, reset your intent. Do this without exerting rigid, obsessive control. Rather, let the depth of dreaming and the force of pure intent sail you off into your timeless journey. 6. Feel the gravity and stability of the mountain, and at the same time, feel your being and the mountain as one, drifting into the infinite throughout the night. 7. In the morning, spend at least 1 hour in totally silent, grateful contemplation and recall the night's revelations before clearing away, eating, or starting the climb down.